So, for my final conclusion for this course, I actually just wanted to pull out my presentation because I think there was a lot of elements in this that I think best answer the conclusion for my PG cert. Let me just make this big screen. Here we go. So, I'm going to just sort of go through the presentation again and sort of just actually tie it to my conclusion because I think, it's all there. So first thing is I want to say that what research has been most impactful for my practice, which authors do I specifically remember, what have I taken away, what have I learnt about the designing learning activities and environments, and how my education philosophy has evolved during the unit. And I think that last one, thinking about the educational philosophy, I think has been a great way to sort of start the course and end the course and thought about what is my outcome from this, which is essentially my educational philosophy. So I started off by looking at my old educational philosophy, and I realised that it was actually quite a personal piece of writing. It was a bit of therapy for me. And I talked a lot about this idea of safe spaces and also not having that level of confidence, sort of losing confidence through my education, as most of the courses were taught in this sage on the stage approach. And as a neurodiverse person, I needed more pedagogies to be used in my lessons. So there was a lot of confusion there, I would say. And I guess I wanted to answer a lot of questions as how can I make my lessons more neurodiverse friendly. So my first bit of research that I came across, which really stuck to me, was this idea that education is inevitably, unavoidably, and properly personal. And I liked this because it sort of gave me justification as to the facts, gave me reason to be like, no, actually, the way I need to be taught is singular, is different. It's not necessarily the same as everyone else. And I kind of think about that all the time with my students. How do they need to be taught? How would they best learn? And then I came across these 3 different pieces of statistics. One is basically on the idea of the fact that diversity in art and design education is really, really high. There is about 9.5% of the entire student population has a disability, and 16.7% of students who study are in creative subjects. So many of the staff, and also the fact that many of the staff who teach are declared as disabled. So there is that level of empathy there, but it's important that we sort of inform all teachers on how in which we can support these creative spaces that are, filled with students who are neurodiverse, who are coming from diverse and different backgrounds. The second one is the fact that also neurodiversity in the creative economy. So when our students move on from their education, how their education can affect in a negative impact, and they might not, because of low confidence, they might not apply for work, unlike people who are not neurodivergent. So again, it's really important to point out and support those creative students, and specifically not have low standards for those neurodiverse students. And then the last thing is students approaching to learning art and design. So even students who are not neurodiverse, so all the students come into that space with different intentions. So one might be more product focused and concerned with remembering the process and the techniques, whereas another student might have a more experimental and a need to engage with others through the process to reach a final outcome, whereas other students might be more conceptually focused. And it's not necessarily about the making, but it's more about the ideas and how those ideas ultimately is an intrinsic has a personal meaning. So these are other things. So when thinking about the learning activities and environments, so how do we support these diverse students? And what I learned from my essays with the learning activities is, let me get back to there, so is this importance of having objectives. So on that previous slide, we talked about different approaches when students come into a space. This talk about objectives is important. So making sure that when students come into the room that there is a very clear objective, whether it's a focus on development, whether it is focus on the outcome, or whether it is about the idea. Then the second thing is extension tasks. So understanding, and I got this was a really interesting TED talk that I watched online called Playing to Our Strengths, Neurodiversity and Education by Christy Hutton. Essentially what she really tries to push forward is this idea that, pace, we often try to get our students to all finish things at the same time, making the key message about pace and about speed, when in fact that isn't important. We all learn at different paces, and that shouldn't matter. It should be about how we reach that outcome. And then the third point is collaboration. So I think this was the third thing that I was really was really a nice feeling, because I spoke a little bit about the importance of collaboration in my educational philosophy, but this really kind of underlined the fact that when we are working in a collaborative environment, our differences start to be treated as resources for collaborative working. So that's why it's so important. And then when we're thinking about our learning environments, I think one that's an obvious is our presentation style. I often sort of come across lessons that I have been taught, and there is so much information that I'm struggling to digest, which is essentially difficult for me to digest, just because of the choice of font or the colours in which we're using. And some of our students are colourblind and cannot see colours like red and green, so it's really important that we think about our colours, our formats and our styles, and thinking about our styles and our neurodiverse students in the room. The second thing, thinking about environments, is psychologically safe classrooms. Reading this was unbelievable. Because it was always something that I felt was important, but then reading this and getting the facts really helped me to support that idea that students need to have positive relationships with their teachers, and good listening is essential when supporting neurodiverse learners, because communication is already a challenge for a lot of neurodiverse students, so it's really important that we represent good listeners in the classroom. And then the last thing is proxemics, and this is something that I often sort of makes me think of drama in a way, because proxemics is something that comes up in drama and comes up in theatre. But this idea that the power relationship within the room can sometimes be enforced by the proxemics between the student and the teacher. Often teachers stand at the front, they're standing up, they might be a lot bigger than the students, and that, immediately makes the students sit back. If a teacher sits among the students, if the teacher sort of engages in a circle time with those students and asks them to lead, that immediately makes them become, the people that they want to be, the designers they wish to be, the artists they wish to be. So all of this information entail, I then just put together a checklist, and I applied this checklist to my own lesson, one of my own lessons, and this was something that I chose to do in this module. And I definitely say that this is when thinking about my conclusion, this is a large thing that I've taken away, because I can now apply this checklist to any of my sessions. And then to sort of finish off, to conclude, I just want to say that when we're thinking about this educational philosophy and how in which it's involved, I think it's, again, interestingly enough, as a neurodivergent person, I just feel more confident. I feel more confident as a student, and I feel more confident as an educator, because I feel like the research is there. I now understand why I've experienced what I've experienced and how I can change that for my students. how I can support that diverse environment.